labor-intensive process that takes 3 days and nights. This method produces distinct grades of steel used for different parts of the blade that can be separated once cooled. The steel is then heated to 1300 degrees Celsius so that it can be forged and pressed into shape. The flying sparks come from impurities left in the steel. Repeatedly kneading and folding the steel removes these impurities and increases its strength. Once the entire blade has been shaped, it is quickly quenched.
Yeah.
It's this sudden change in temperature that produces the curvature typical of a Japanese blade. Japanese swords are still made today using the same methods that were developed over 1,000 years ago. A completed sword represents the combined work of a whole host of specialist master craftsmen.
What's interesting about these swords is that often a samurai's sword, if it has that kind of history, they would give a name to it.
A name?
A name, yeah. It's an indication of how sort of valuable the attachment that a samurai had to a sword above all else.
For a samurai, their sword was not just a weapon, but more like an extension of themselves, to be treated with great care and respect. After a final battle in 1615, peace eventually came to samurai-era Japan. The new shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu unified the country and banned all fighting. The Tokugawa government would go on to oversee more than 250 years of peace. With no more battles to fight, samurai lost their principal means of making a name for themselves. Gradually, the need to practice sword skills for actual use in battle fell away. Around that time, the master swordsman Yagyu Munenori became increasingly influential. Munenori was the successor of the Yagyu Shinkage-ryu school. As a follower of Tokugawa Ieyasu, he had helped him unify the nation. In peacetime, Munenori continued to serve the Tokugawa clan as a teacher of swordsmanship. In 1632, Yagyu Munenori published the Heiho Kadensho, which described his prior experiences in battle. The book included the exposition of two key concepts, that of setsunin-to and katsunin-ken. Translated literally, these words mean respectively the sword that takes life and the sword that gives life. His use of these two contrasting principles was deeply rooted in Buddhist practices of the time. The terms setsunin-to and katsunin-ken are in fact both borrowed from Japanese Buddhism.
Katsunin-ken means the sword that gives life. Setsunin-to, the sword that takes life, is needed to release that part of a person that holds them back, that stops them from growing. Setsunin-to is the power of the teacher. Since the disciple cannot rid themselves of everything on their own, the master puts them under intense pressure. The idea is to crush that person's strengths. This is to help them to see that relying on their strengths is a big mistake. That's the skill of setsunin-to. When the disciple realizes that nothing can help them, they find the will to start from nothing. That's where the life-giving sword first emerges. The killing part is key, because once strength is abandoned, someone will naturally grow.
The Yagyu Shinkage-ryu school applied this approach to actual swordsmanship. The school abandoned the standard emphasis on using power simply to dominate one's opponent, and instead focused on harnessing the strength of the opponent to achieve victory. Today, we are privileged to be able to observe a demonstration of Katsunin-ken techniques as still taught by the Yagyu Shinkage-ryu. Yagyu Shinkage-ryu's Katsunin-ken techniques require the swordsman to launch a counterattack just as his opponent tries to strike. The swordsman deliberately tempts his opponent to strike by creating just a small opening for him to target.
You expose your right arm to your opponent as bait, then you keep that arm forward as you approach them. You can anticipate that that's where they'll attack, and you use that trap to win. The opponent thinks they have a chance and will attack the opening you've given them, and that reduces the risk for you, which is the idea of Katsunin-ken.
Munenori also taught his followers the importance both of polishing their sword skills and of using those skills to try and resolve situations peacefully.
Munenori taught that if you can kill a bad person and save many others in the process, then the setsuninto can be transformed into Katsunin-ken. If someone on the right path wields the sword, then instead of becoming a weapon to kill, it actually has the potential to become a way of giving people life.
The idea of the sword as a means of saving lives began to spread, changing the way the samurai viewed the world. The spirit of Katsunin-ken now lives on in various schools of Kenjutsu. Today, the Tenshinryu school teaches a technique known as nukiuchi. The sword is drawn, but is flipped over so as to attack with its blunt edge.
The best result is to not have to draw your sword at all. If your opponent draws, though, you have no choice but to stop them. This is also part of Katsunin-ken. But even if you have to draw your sword, then if it ends without bloodshed, this is Katsunin-ken too. If you feel your mission was to kill this opponent, then that's not Katsunin-ken. But if the opponent is violent and harming other people, you have to stop them. So that is Katsunin-ken.
The Edo Mugai-ryu school have their own approach.
Katsunin-ken is the ultimate skill in Mugai-ryu. That means defeating an opponent without killing or injuring them. People who have mastered the art can avoid being attacked. This is because they radiate that kind of aura. And there is something about them which prevents people from taking them on. The ultimate form of the art is to be able to force the opponent to apologize and leave, simply due to your presence. You don't even need to draw your sword. That's true Katsunin-ken.
Enduring, grueling training leads to spiritual growth. One of the reasons increasing numbers of samurai began to dedicate themselves to such training was the growing belief in the importance of striving today to improve on one's performance of yesterday.
Being able to maintain a stable mental state is extremely important. If you can't maintain a stable state, then you won't be able to harness all you've learned. You can lose your cool. That's why you need to train your heart.
Such spiritual training is now one of the fundamental principles of Japanese martial arts. The philosophy of cultivating one's heart and body together has, through various sports, including karate and judo, spread around the world and become widely appreciated.
So your opponent, in a setsunin-to sense, your opponent is the enemy, the person that you have to beat. But if, as you go along or walk the way of the martial arts and you become more understanding of the deep, the relevance of it to your life, you see your opponent not as an enemy, but as a collaborator, somebody who is walking a path with you and you're helping each other along. So you learn empathy rather than hatred, and so that's why Katsuninken is such an important, underlying or underpinning philosophy in the modern Japanese martial arts.
The spirit of Katsuninken continues to draw people from all walks of life and around the world to practicing Japan's unique martial arts.
We're going to finish our show with a look at the recently announced route through the capital that marathon runners at the 2020 Tokyo Games will be following.
The Tokyo Olympic Marathon will start at the 80,000-seater Olympic Stadium, currently under construction. The new stadium will also host both the opening and closing ceremonies. At the 15-kilometre mark, the course passes through the famous tourist district of Asakusa, with views of the Tokyo Skytree. Towering at 634 metres high, the Broadcasting Tower is Tokyo's tallest building. The Kaminarimon, or Thunder Gate, at Sensoji Temple in Asakusa is famous for its giant lantern.
I think it's a very good idea to include all these touristic places that are really flavored in the Japan style, so many people can find them and get to know them.
The course then turns south, reaching Zojoji Temple at the base of Tokyo Tower. At 333 metres high, it is Tokyo's second tallest structure. The contrast of Zojoji Temple, one of Japan's important cultural assets, and Tokyo Tower, a symbol of post-war reconstruction, makes for one of Tokyo's iconic views. After the 30-kilometre mark, runners will pass through the Kokyo Gaien National Garden, a relaxing green oasis in the middle of the busy city that adjoins the Imperial Palace.
It's refreshing with all this greenery.
Naoko Takahashi, Sydney 2000 Olympic marathon gold medalist and JOC member, explains the characteristics of the course.
The course tours Tokyo's main sites, making it stimulating for runners and fun for spectators.
The route has few slopes and is relatively flat throughout. An uphill section at the 37-kilometre mark, however, may play a key role in deciding who crosses the ribbon first. After completing the climb, runners return to the Olympic Stadium where the race began. It is hoped the 2020 Games will bring thrilling marathon races that go right down to the wire.